All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today, this is part 2 of my conversation with Ian McFarland. If you did not hear part 1, Ian, man, he is one of those guys in Silicon Valley who has done so much. He's a great technologist. He's literally written a book. You get these people, I don't know if you get them in other industries. I don't know if you get this in maybe you do, the law industry or the banking industry, but he's written a book on technology. He's been a CTO. He speaks 14 languages. He's articulate on topics ranging from Bitcoin to women in tech. It's crazy. And I guess the fact that he has such a background is why our conversation ranges so widely as he does here. This is the Something Ventured podcast. Thanks for coming back. This is part 2 of my conversation with Ian McFarland. It may be that your energy should not be going into that music discovery app,
right,
or whatever.
Right.
You know,
No, I mean, people talk about the Series A crunch, and it's like there's just as much Series A as there ever was. It's just that there's way more companies getting through the seed stage than there ever used to be. So, like, the selection criteria get more stringent. Yeah,
and the Series A crunch, which is that it's relatively easy to get seed money, but then if you haven't proven anything, it's hard to raise a Series A.
Right.
Well, kind of fair, right? Like someone gave you $1 million.
You spent it.
It didn't work.
Right.
And
why do I need to give you $3 million now? Or
right. And so if you say, hey, we tried this thing and people are riding these Uber cars all over the place, give me a Series A, great.
Right. And all we need it's pure growth capital. Like if we're going to grow organically 30% a month.
Exactly.
But with a big influx of capital, we could grow at 60% a month. That's
well, I've heard VCs, and of course VCs would say this, but that there's things that they know too as your company grows that you just learned from other people who have just grown a company.
Right.
And I talked to some pretty well-respected VCs, like, if Groupon had been in Silicon Valley, they might have done better. Like they might have.
I think that's right.
They might have not missed some of the things they missed.
Yeah.
If they'd had been here and had the right. Which is kind of who knows, of course.
Groupon's a strange one. I mean, that was always sort of a lopsided, pyramid-y kind of business.
It's like a failure, but it's got like a $6 billion valuation or something still.
Yeah. No, I know.
By the way, I never understood what the problem was with Groupon. It just seemed like it made
the problem
sense
was
to me.
It didn't convert for customers, right?
Like, I guess that must be.
I've talked to lots of merchants who used Groupon, who offered Groupons, and they just said, mostly it was just a way for cheapskate people to buy our services for less.
Like, oh, fair enough. Huh?
And as opposed to, like, you end up with people who just use Groupons, but they don't turn into long-term customers.
Yeah.
And so it's a deep discount. Like, if it was a shallower discount. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
They could have tried a bunch of stuff, and I'm sure they thought about trying.
I guess, because the first time I used it, it was like people were doing that I knew were doing what you're supposed to do. Like, there's this new restaurant. I don't know. Let's go try it.
It's 50% off. I'm going to go try it.
Yeah, they did the tip, on the full amount, and then if they liked it, they'd go back or not go back. But I guess people were just kind of abusing the crap out of it all over the place. Right. And that one, I was talking to somebody who had a chance to invest. It's just so funny how you don't know. Invest in Uber. And they didn't do it. And they used Uber early on. And they saw everyone using Uber, and they decided not to do it.
Right. No, seeing signal in the market. This is how I ended up at Friendster. It's I talked about Cyberganic and the Thursday night dinners. Yeah. All my friends from that era were on Friendster all the time. Yeah. Spending like half their day on it. I was like, maybe we're on to something. This is, by the way, all of you who don't realize, this is the thing that was called social networking before Facebook existed.
And filed a patent on it and all of that, too. Yeah. Was really the innovation.
Right.
I mean, Facebook got it right. And
they totally got the product right. There's a bunch of reasons. That's a long conversation why they succeeded where we didn't.
But that is where they started.
But the idea of social networking was like...
Well, and it's funny how you can be so close to an idea. I don't think Friendster was an entirely different story. But you can be so close to the idea, like the Zimride or Get Around.
Yeah, totally.
Where they had the right insight, which is most cars are...
Sit idle all the time.
Right. And they're like, so people should share their cars.
Right.
Nope, people didn't want to share cars; they wanted rides.
Right.
And so once you made that leap,
it's the Ford quote. Like if I asked them what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. They would have asked for car sharing instead of ride sharing.
Right.
Like it turns out, they didn't want faster horses. They didn't want to share their cars. They just wanted to get someplace.
Yeah, and and so this person I know who didn't invest. He said it was great, but it's like this highfalutin app for black cars for, kids in Silicon Valley.
Right.
And then they just made that next little leap, which is like, no, we can do it for, UberX comes out.
Right.
And, but it's just so funny. Like the idea was sitting there for like,
Sure.
GPS has been enabled for a while. Car sharing's been around for a while.
Right.
At some point, I think you just have to be that crazy Silicon Valley guy too, who goes, "Oh, it sounds like it's against the law, but shouldn't be."
Right.
So I'm gonna.
Right.
Because I would have said, well, the cab companies are going to put you out of business or something.
I mean, you look at Flywheel, right? Like the thesis there was like, let's do this with the cab companies.
Yeah.
And that's gone really well, right?
It's just too late, right?
It was about the same. I don't think it's too late. I think it is too late in the sense that, so, both of these started in San Francisco where it's like New York doesn't have a taxi problem. San Francisco always had a taxi problem. It was impossible to get a taxi. Yeah. So there, if you tried to launch one of these things in New York, it'd be like, why?
Yeah.
But maybe in the boroughs, right? Like maybe in the outer boroughs where it actually is impossible to get a cab, that would make sense. But in San Francisco, it was really hard. So there was this demand. And as far as it being too late, I think it took longer to get critical mass with Flywheel.
Yeah.
Because it was only working with the cabs and because they were trying to be very careful about doing it in a way that was consistent with like working with the unions and working with the...
Well, and I assume they don't... I've seen their CEO talk. He's very impressive.
Yeah.
It's very impressive. Like, they're doing as best as he could do. Like, he's saying the right things, which is like, well, the big thing was, what about disabled people? Like, that's regulated with cabs. We have to have a certain number of cabs that have the wheelchair accessibility. Like, well, it's going to take Uber about 12 seconds to have that. Like, if that's the problem, like, they'll figure that out.
Right.
And you'll be able to order an Uber, accessible or whatever. I think they actually do have it now. But yeah, he had the right idea. I guess you can't do the rating, I assume. Can I rate a cabbie in Flywheel? Oh, okay.
And you can tip and you can do all these things. You don't have to, but...
Yeah.
I mean, so I use it because, one, I think, all these cabbies have actually paid a bunch of, like, there's one, the quality of the drivers is a lot better, let's be honest.
Right.
Like, how many times have I gotten in an Uber and then going, like, I would like to go to the airport. Yeah. And it's like, where is that?
Well, and that is where the GPS coming into being is.
That helps, right? Yeah. But you still have drivers who have no, like, if you get into a cab, you expect that you can say the name of any reasonably well-known landmark or any street address, and they will get you there.
Well, and around where our office is near freeway on ramps,
right?
And so if you just do what the GPS says, you're driving on the wrong street at 4:30 in the afternoon to get back to the mission. Like, you're like, no.
That will take 4 hours.
Like, they're routing you onto the freeway to get to the mission at 5 o'clock on a Friday.
Just take 3rd Street.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it feels like it's been the kind of mesh businesses like that have been one of the most profound sort of social changes where you see it changing the world. Like, when I went to Mexico City, I was like, okay, how do I get from the airport to the hotel, and they're like, you get an Uber?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, yeah.
Okay.
Right. Like, honestly, especially with when there are language differences, like getting around places, like, it's hard to get around Japan if you don't speak Japanese. And eventually I learned enough that I could actually get in a cab. But being able to Uber instead, like, I'm going from here to here, I can figure that out in English on my English application. And
I talked to so I have a friend who, I've heard this from a few women, and I can't repeat this, but I can't repeat it right. They prefer sidecar.
Interesting.
And I forget why. I think I've heard from multiple women.
So much less rapey.
Yes, it's that. It's that they can. It's like they can choose their driver.
Interesting.
But the drivers can choose them, and I think you tell them where you're going beforehand. I don't know. I've heard it from multiple people. It's a thing. I've got to figure out why it's a thing so I can repeat
it. In any case,
it.
Clearly the idea of using your iPhone, which has GPS, to get somebody to drive you somewhere, whether it's with a licensed taxi through Flywheel or through Uber's taxi stuff, or through a black car or through a UberX or through whatever. That's totally changed the way people get around in San Francisco.
I mean,
and anywhere.
Well, I've talked to friends in LA. They say it's transformed their nightlife because you used to not go out in LA because you're like, I can't really drink, and then get in a car, and cabs were so
LA
crazy.
LA is impossible without that. Yeah.
And so now I've heard, hey, this changes our.
You just take the red car.
What's that?
The streetcar that they've shut down.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that goes everywhere.
Used to go everywhere. Why would you build a freeway?
But it feels like it's. I think
Roger Rabbit.
Exactly. It feels like it's been one of the a big change in the kind of societal fabric. I think dating apps were a bit like that, where it opened up. I heard a survey recently where people who used to 30 years ago used to marry or be in relationships with people like who were proximate to them.
Right.
Like the odds
usually that they went to high school with.
But it was literally like the odds that they were in your same city were like 80%, that they were in your same building were like 20%.
Right.
Like crazy. And then the dating apps kind of said, hey, you know, you're into knitting and hiking and kite surfing, and this woman is into that too. And you just started.
Right.
It opened up these massive connections outside of like, you know, going to a bar.
That's the funny thing. Like when people think about, like, when people talked about dating apps being creepy, it's like, as opposed to going to a bar.
Well, like the information. I mean, if you went to a bar and you were into, you know, etymology and you had diabetes, so diabetes health was important to you.
Right.
How long would that take you in a bar?
I don't think she's drinking sugar cubes in her cocktail. That's a good sign.
I mean, how long would that take? You go online, you're like, wow, here's 10 people with my interests, with my lifestyle, with my religious preference. And now you got to figure it out from there.
Right.
You know, then you meet people who are like, oh, well, we have no chemistry. Okay,
right. Turns out that's still important. We haven't solved that at all.
But you know, you're down to like. I mean, you're a teacher who doesn't meet people at school because they're all children,
right? Because that'd be wrong,
right? Yeah, right. That makes no sense. And so, like, that was a pretty big one. But it just feels like another funny thing too is that I did a check-in app that went nowhere. You know, check-in I wouldn't say Foursquare has gone nowhere, but most of the other check-in apps pivoted or didn't work.
They've all sort of. I mean, Swarm's still around, but it's like it's sort of on like. I mean, even there, they went with Foursquare as their core app. Right?
Well, and once Facebook put it into their interface where you could say, I'm in Tokyo,
right,
or at this restaurant on Facebook, you know, it makes it... But it's so funny. So, you have an enabled phone that can, you know, locate you, and everybody was doing check-ins.
Right.
Well, the correct answer was use it to call cars.
Right.
And connect people who want to give rides to people who want rides.
Right.
That was like 7 years or 5 years when that idea was just sitting there.
Yeah, the market making potential and all. I mean, all the sharing economy stuff is really market making.
Right. But I think there's some things like a lot of people like Matt Kohler, you know, of Benchmark would argue that Facebook and Friendster took off pretty close to when digital photography became widely available and you could post
a picture.
Post a picture that you could.
Turns out that was important.
Yeah.
Flickr would have been very boring without digital photography.
Right, exactly. But it feels like in the case of Uber, that was around for that could have happened.
It could have happened 3 or 4 years or I mean, really. I mean, geolocation. I mean, it used to be kind of the running joke that this is the year of geolocation for like about 8 years before the iPhone shipped, and it was really the ubiquity, like the fact that the iPhone always had GPS. There were Android phones, there weren't. I mean, there were Java phones that had GPS, but it wasn't consistently available. And suddenly the iPhone ships with GPS, and suddenly there's a platform that's big enough that it makes sense to start building geolocation apps on.
Right. It's just funny that everyone went to the same, it's like that thing where like they could never break the 4-minute mile.
Right.
And then as soon as they did it, everyone did it.
Well, of course, that guy did it.
Because your brain,
I know it's possible now.
Right, your brain just went, it's possible. And I think that, like, with geolocation, I was like, it must have to do with checking in or where I am,
No, these paradigm shifts, they happen, and they're what Ted Nelson used to call retroactively obvious. Which I think is
funny.
It really does capture for me, like, what... Yeah. It's like, oh, well, of course you're going to do it that way.
I was just reading the Nassim... Do you remember Nassim Taleb? You know, the guy, he wrote the Black Swan.
Oh, yeah.
And so he talks about how things that haven't been around long tend not to be around long.
Right.
So he's like, I never read a book that's the hot book from last year. Because it hasn't been around long.
It doesn't have any longevity.
He's like, I predict the Bible will be around for another 1,000 years because it's been around for the last 1,000 years. But will the book that came out last year probably won't be around for 1,000 years?
Nope.
I was like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But it is funny how things happen and all of a sudden everyone's like, I mean, the black car, that cars are idle, that you can... People want to make money giving you rides. Mm-hmm. Like the first time I met a woman who was like, "Oh yeah, I'm putting myself through college. I'm doing this Uber thing." Right. As soon as you hear that, you're like, "Oh, that's going to happen." Like that was eBay when people were like, "I'm making a living selling things on eBay." Yeah. Now you got people building a life on your platform. Like it's gonna work.
Right.
Like I can live in San Francisco. I don't know if it's true or not. Airbnb certainly acts like it is, but
most Uber drivers in San Francisco live in the East Bay.
They do.
Yeah.
Like it's funny every time you meet them, they're like,
"Wow, you drive in? Oh my god!"
Well, the funny thing too is they're like, "Why do you live here? It's really cold." Like it's lovely where I live.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, Jay Adelson's here at the Founders Den now. Have you ever met him? He was the Dig guy and the Equinix guy.
I think I met him once, but we've never had a real.
So he's got a Internet of Things venture fund now. Mm-hmm. What's going on with the Internet of Things? Are we just renaming something that's been around the whole way?
Not really, because I think what's changing is it's the notion of connected devices.
Yeah.
But I mean, people say that people. Like many credible people say, this is going to be a $14 trillion industry.
That's the number.
That's the number.
Yeah.
The problem with that is I think we're going to make that $14 trillion 25 cents at a time.
Okay.
Like, there's going to be so many devices. Like, you can't... I mean, yes, I think if you're... let's say you're GE. You're going to make a lot of money on connected. Or Philips, right? Like, you're going to add this stuff to everything. And it's going to be...
Have you heard the GE CEO talk lately? He is talking about the internet. That he seems to get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's like, we're about technology. And
Beth Comstock's been talking about this stuff for a long time.
Right.
She's CMO there. She's brilliant. I mean, she
also
founded Hulu.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't
know she did that.
I know, it's kind of crazy.
So wait, what is she? Is she now with Barack Obama?
No, she's the CMO of GE.
Okay, right, Beth Comstock.
She's super smart. I mean, she came in when we did the Lean Startup Conference.
Right.
The year that we were doing it, she came and spoke at that, and it was like, I just think she's really insightful.
GE, this guy, I mean, not that I grasp, but he was just like, you know what? Yeah, technology, here's what we can do. We can make aircraft engines and no one else can.
Right.
So our technology can monitor your aircraft engine and make it 2% more effective, which is
so much money.
Squillions of dollars.
Right.
And he's like, we understand that people aren't going to spend their whole engineering careers, meaning not that kind of engineering, but like technology, internet guy at GE.
Right.
But we'd love to have you for 5 years and go to Facebook and then come to GE.
Right.
And I was like, wow, I see you're saying the right shit.
So I mean, I think the industry will be fundamentally the things industry, the hardware industry will be fundamentally transformed. But we're still in the hobbyist phase, right? I mean, we used to be able to control light switches with X10, and that was horrible. And,
right.
And like nerdy people who like to go to Radio Shack would buy their X10 stuff. I did that.
And there's no more Radio Shack, right?
I know. Which is sad because they were just at the point like now with all the maker stuff where they're starting to become relevant again.
I thought they turned around. I thought they were becoming
I felt like they were too.
I thought they were like selling Sprint phones or something that was working.
Yeah, well, now they're part of, like, they got all those stores are Sprint storefronts.
I know, but you can't go get, like, the RCA jack there or the soldering iron or whatever you used to buy there.
Right. So now you have to buy that stuff on Amazon.
So they're not going to connect the nuclear plants to the Internet of Things, are they? Like,
oh, they already are. How do you think Stuxnet worked?
Oh, that's right. God damn it! Like that just seems like
it's
a problem.
Bad idea.
Like airplanes shouldn't be connected.
Air gaps are important. Well, like you just saw the guy last week, who hacked the Jeep Cherokee from a distance.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
Yeah, I don't want that to happen to my car.
Old cars, you can't do that. There's literally nothing in there.
There's no electronics, right?
Yeah,
like you could hack it the way they did in like James Bond films, right? Like you could go cut the brake line.
There was a car fire at our block. Fire truck kind of showed up and they sort of languidly put it out, and the fireman was like, "Yeah, it's these smart cars. The electronics get hot and catch on fire."
Oh God! So it's thermal runaway and some battery pack or something.
I guess I'm like, well, they're not that smart, then, are they?
No, it could be smarter.
It could be like not catching on fire. That's just crazy.
Now you sound like Trump talking about McCain there.
Oh, yeah, right. I'm a grumpy old man now.
No, but you're right. It should be smart enough to.
You can't figure it out, right? Like as you're a normal human, you can't just look at it. Oh, the carburetor
at all.
That is a little strange.
Yeah.
So the Internet of Things, like what? Like is that? That's not like a company or something you invest in. It's
it's a giant trend, right? Yeah. And I think, what you're seeing is that Shenzhen is the center of the world for hardware, the way Silicon Valley is the center of the world for software.
Oh, really?
Yes, I mean, you're starting to see, and you're starting to see Valley. There are a bunch of Valley startups who are starting to emulate pieces of the life cycle,
right.
But. I mean, the same way you can walk down the street here and you could go to any cafe and find, I'm sure if you went to any cafe, you could find somebody who writes iOS apps, somebody who writes Android apps, somebody who writes back-end stuff, somebody who I need a Go programmer who has experience with XMPP, right? Like you could find that.
Right.
In Shenzhen, you can go find people who know how to make any kind of hardware, any kind of management stuff for hardware.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you want to work in aluminum? I know a guy. Actually, I know 3 guys. Which one do you want?
Right.
Like, you need what? You need injection molding? Yeah.
Yeah.
My friend, she is like all over that.
That's interesting.
And you can get it at different levels of scale too, right? Like
Yeah.
you can go from prototype scale, like from 100 units to 10,000 units. And that you can't do outside of Shenzhen.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so what happens is that sort of serviceizes that whole back end, right? Like it used to. It's totally true. Like you said, like didn't we have this already? In the same way that Larry Ellison was technically right that the cloud already existed. There is something very different about being able to buy it on demand from Amazon, right? Like that totally changed the world.
Yep.
And in the same way, if you're an entrepreneur, you can go design a product and you can bring it to market as an individual entrepreneur with a Kickstarter or even on your own. So that's fundamentally different. I mean, the downside is then you have a lot of people who will announce their product on Kickstarter who didn't even bother to figure out what it was going to cost to make.
Right.
And then it turns out it costs more to make than they're making on it, and they like have a wildly successful Kickstarter and then lose their shirt.
It is funny. You see it in Silicon Valley now. Even in our office here, we're like, it used to be, everyone's working, typing away at some computer, and now we've got people with like
Stuff.
things like models. They smoke and do stuff like
or drones or like everybody's got a drone somewhere in their office.
Yeah, drones. We got some.
They're like Nerf weapons now.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. We have some. Yeah, drones like are. I'm ready for that to be a problem at some point.
It's already a problem. They're starting to have like. We couldn't fight a forest fire effectively because there were drones in the way, or like had a near collision with in an airport from a drone.
That just happened down in LA, right? With the they were trying to put out a fire and there were drones around, like
oh, cool fire! Let me capture pictures of it. Like, excuse me, sir, I'd like to put this fire out.
That seems like a really bad idea.
Yeah.
So when do I need to worry about Bitcoin? Do I need to worry about that at any point?
Well, if you're in a strong Bitcoin position, I mean, Bitcoin's super interesting. To me, the blockchain's the interesting thing with Bitcoin.
What is the blockchain?
So the blockchain is the magical piece that is a shared ledger that's that has non-repudiation in it.
Yeah.
But it's distributed.
And who thought it? Like, so I've got all the transactions.
Yeah. So, but you're not the only one who has all the transactions.
Right.
Everyone can inspect the transaction log.
Right.
Go look at the blockchain. Everyone knows, even though there's no single source of trust.
Yeah.
There's a distributed source of trust, and so you know that if this blockchain was signed with these transactions, that you can trust that.
Okay.
So that's the fundamental thing that makes Bitcoin magical. Now, as a currency, like it's funny, people try to say, "Oh, it has intrinsic value," like the same way gold has intrinsic value because it has the blockchain.
Yeah.
That doesn't really work because there's only one. Like you could have an infinite number of the units of the blockchain,
right?
And you can't have an infinite number of units of gold.
Well, why is it so? For Bitcoin, my understanding is there's some finite number that can ever be produced.
That's correct. So the way the Bitcoin was designed was there's a certain amount that it keeps ratcheting up to a limit of how much can be mined, and the complexity of mining goes up over time.
And isn't it? Wouldn't that be inflationary though? Like if you had just
it is inflationary. It's intended to be slightly inflationary.
Okay,
but it's only slightly inflationary.
Yeah,
and so immediately there's also more. The idea is it's a new currency, so its demand will increase faster than its inflationary rate. But it's fine for it to be somewhat inflationary.
Yeah. I've heard some really ungenerous estimates that a huge amount of computing power is being spent on.
That's my problem with it. Is like, why are we spending? Like, do we really need to solve all these primes on compute? Like, how much heat is generated? From
that's
Bitcoin?
what I've heard. Like somebody, I mean, this is like some huge amount of carbon being generated in the creation of Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's not a non-polluting form of currency.
Yeah. I don't know. It's crazy. That's the one that I like. Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz is a big fan of Bitcoin. He thinks it's the biggest opportunity ever.
Well, I think what everyone's seeing in it is a change in the way currency works, right? Like, and the ability to. We've already had most transactions in the United States, at least, are now credit card transactions, and so you already have electronic payments. Fairly ubiquitous, but what you don't have is cash transactions that are ubiquitous. And this isn't the first time this has happened, by the way. There was also Cybercoin back in this last time this revolution happened was like 10, 15 years ago with Cybercoin.
Yeah.
And it's different in the sense of this, it's a better piece of technology and the non-repudiation is better, but it also attracts all kinds of bad actors. Like there's a reason that Silk Road was done this way.
Yep.
So it's not even a question of could it be used ethically and fairly? But it's always going to attract darknet people to it. And then the funny thing is, like a lot of advocates for it are so concerned about fiat money, right? Because, like the money that just because governments print it doesn't necessarily make it better, they say.
Right.
But so this is instead money that's not backed by any authority.
Yeah.
And everybody just, yes, you could trade. I mean, we could trade whatever, right? Like we could trade pocket lint if we decided that it was valuable.
Yeah. It just seems weird not having a government behind it.
Well, it turns out having a government behind it's actually kind of nice.
Right. There's a guy you can go to.
Well, there's somebody who's concerned about macroeconomic policy who has a vested interest in making sure that we still believe that dollars are valuable. Mm-hmm. And yes, we can do things like quantitative easing, which are, like we're going to print way more money. Yes, that's inflationary, but it turns out it works. It works. It's probably good. I mean, you have you have interesting situations like Greece right now,
right?
Which they're in an interesting situation because they don't have direct control over their monetary policy.
But they also cheated along the way.
They cheated a lot.
They sort of
right, they really...
that just blows me away where they're like, well, they were misrepresenting their numbers.
Only by a large factor.
And everyone knew they were misrepresenting their numbers. I'm like, what? The
funny thing about that is the idea that somehow the Greeks are being abused by the fact that they're asking for additional loans and having conditions placed on it.
It's like, what are you all doing?
Right.
I totally don't get it.
In any case, the idea of having a banking authority, whether it's a state or a non-governmental entity like the Federal Reserve or the ECB, backing the currency and trying to make sure that it's valuable.
That's the best insight I've heard about Bitcoin. That does sound right. That there's no benevolent actor, maybe not benevolent, but you know what they're trying to accomplish.
Right. In fact, you don't need them to be benevolent as long as you understand their motivation.
I know what that guy's doing.
Right.
That's really interesting. Well, I won't keep you forever. I want to have you back and talk about women in tech and a couple of other things, which I've talked about a lot in this. But a couple. Where did it start with you? With what was the first computer? For
me?
Yeah.
It was in elementary school.
Oh,
I went to Nueva Day School here on the peninsula, which is this school for smart kids. Which thankfully my parents didn't tell me that at the time. But but it was this private school, and one of the parents had access to borrow a mini computer.
Yeah,
which is crazy. This is we're going to have this mini computer for a week. This $10,000 or $40,000 mini computer. But mini computer does not mean it's small. By the way, it's like a desk-sized thing. And so I learned some programming on that.
Yeah.
This school we had 3 times a year we had mini courses, and it was we'll spend a week doing just interesting things. And so we learned programming. My parents got me an Apple II when I was a kid, and when I was 10 years old, and it was the best investment they made in my future.
Sure.
I mean, this is at the time a $4,000 investment.
Yeah.
Which is today would be $12,000.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so I got this computer when I was a kid, and I remember my parents would remind me that when I unpacked it, I literally didn't go to bed for 48 hours. I just played with this thing.
Yeah.
And that was the start. I mean, I started using computers.
That's such
a kid.
That narrative is so funny because that's the Bill Gates. I mean, if you made as much money as Bill Gates, but
I did not.
That was the narrative that he was at a rich school that somehow they got a deal to get access to a computer, and he was smart, but he was also one of the very few people in the world
who actually had the
access to the computer.
Right. I mean, this is what we need to do. Is we need to give every kid access to a computer. The OLPC thing is interesting, but honestly, regular, we don't need to make a special computer. We can get computers for $200 now at retail.
And is it an issue for kids? Because when you learned computers, you're probably pretty close to the hardware.
It was a lot closer to the hardware.
You knew you knew what was going on.
It wasn't a very capable machine, right?
No, but you kind of knew what was going on and what the machine was doing and what the circuit boards were doing. And now you learn computer. You kind of start at such an advanced phase.
Yeah.
Does that? I don't know. Is it just you're an old man and you're it used to be better?
No,
or is
I think there's real value in starting to learn from a simpler world.
From the zeros and ones and the.
It wasn't from the zeros and ones. I mean, we were learning BASIC, which is a high level language. It's it's very abstract, but we're still learning simple logic. I mean, I think for kids, getting a Linux box is so much more useful than getting a Windows machine or a Mac. I mean, Mac at least you have Unix underneath, so something where you learning to program from the command line where you don't have that much complexity.
Yeah,
that helps.
That's
getting low level and understanding what's going on, because you don't necessarily know what's going on with the card, but you know what's going on with the logic.
Right. Yeah, so many people I know who work on computers now went through that phase of they had a Commodore or something.
Totally.
And
I know a lot of C64 people.
Yeah, right. Or they went through a phase where they had to program within serious constraints.
Yeah. Yeah, it helps.
And now they're appreciative of what exists, but they have a grounding in something else. And now you have people who are just kind of starting, in some sense.
When you have effectively almost infinite computing capability on your phone, right? It's like it's hard to appreciate
so you can be
thinking about memory management.
Be a little sloppier.
But that's okay. That's okay too, right? I mean, it's good that we don't have to worry so much about memory. You do end up with slow code sometimes if you don't think about it. But
yeah, fair enough. What? So you're reading anything interesting these days?
Ooh, what am I reading?
You always have a cool book on your thing. And
what did I just read? I'm totally blanking on what it was.
I'm reading that Nassim Taleb book.
That was a good book. That was a good read.
He has a new one. He's a weird guy. I didn't realize what a weird guy he is. So he wrote The Black Swan, and his new book is like The Black Swan again. And he says it. He's like, I'm rewriting the same book over and over. I'm just learning more and more.
Oh,
it's becoming more and more.
Should be a new edition. I think, right?
But it's funny. He'll be explaining stuff, and he's like, now I'm going to take a break and go back to explaining in numbers and curves, which is easier for me.
Oh, interesting.
And he'll be like,
that's a different read.
Yeah, whenever he simplifies things, it's hard for him.
Right.
And then once he's like, forget it, I'll just show you the numbers. See? Like,
right.
And he has all these... It's about things that are fragile and not fragile. And sort of like if you work at IBM for 30 years, you think you've got a very stable job. And if you work as a taxi cab driver, you think it's not. Mm-hmm. But the little adjustments you make as a taxi cab driver to the market or as a consultant actually means your job's far more stable than the person who worked at IBM for 30 years and got fired.
Right.
Stuff
the ability
like that.
Your ability to recover is much higher. Your personal resiliency. Yeah. I recently read "Poorly Made in China," which was interesting. It was interesting. It's a fun read. It's about manufacturing in China. It's from a consumer products. It's from a like toothpaste and soap kind of perspective.
Oh wow!
And it's entertaining and funny. Economists gave it a really high rating.
Yeah,
but I have to say, I think it's a little bit dismissive of what's going on in China. I think the level of quality that's available in China, it still takes very active management. But what came across for me that was never highlighted in the book was how much we have a tendency in the U.S. to talk about China as very profligate and lazy and always seeking that tiny profit margin.
Yeah.
But what kept coming up for me was that the same exact thing was happening on the U.S. side. Like they were like, we're going to accept poor quality because we think we can pass it on to our customer.
Right.
So where exactly is the difference, the ethical difference between the two?
Oh, that's interesting.
But it was full of funny stories, and they definitely resonate. They're true to character, except for the fact that you can find people who are genuinely engaged in trying to make quality products. And the fact is, all the highest quality consumer electronics we buy are made in China.
All the Apple stuff comes from China.
Mostly it's Taiwanese-run companies in China, interestingly.
Yeah, I believe that.
Foxconn being the big one.
The big one, yeah.
They make beautiful products.
Yeah.
And you can get really crappy products. But the thing is, you can get really crappy products for almost no money. Right.
Right.
There's something to There's something to being able to get a full-featured Android 3G phone for $40 a unit.
Yeah.
Right? That with touchscreen and the whole bit. We can't do that.
No, we can't. It's pretty crazy.
And we wouldn't. Right. It wouldn't make economic sense to try.
Right. That's crazy. Well, I'm going to track that book down.
It's a fun read.
All right, that's good. All right, well, this has been great. I want to talk, at least sometimes, talk about women in tech, and I want to talk about lean startup stuff and all that.
Sure.
Let's leave that for another day.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, well, thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, this has been the Something Adventure Podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom.
I'm Ian McFarland.
And my guest, thank you so much.
Yeah.